Coming in at number 10 is Selene. Selene is a mutant and what is known as an external. Externals are essentially a group of immortals that include characters like Apocalypse and Gideon, who can resurrect themselves and all share a psychic link, which is the main thing that separates them from other immortals. Selene is also a magician and was born 17,000 years ago. She gained the ability to psionically drain the life forces of other human beings into herself, gaining their memories and, if she fully drains them, turning that individual into dust. Essentially, she's like an energy vampire. Using this drained energy, she not only sustains herself, but can grant herself superhuman levels of physical strength, speed, stamina, agility, reflexes, and durability. Since she has been around for so long, she is quite the adept sorcerer and can do a hell of a lot with that power. She's demonstrated telepathy, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, and a knack for being pretty sinister, but not really being too well known to casual fans. Number 9. Barbatos. Barbatos is one of the big bads from the death metal event, but because we had the Batman Who Laughs, I think Barbatos kind of fell by the wayside for a few people, and I'll admit, I was one of them. But Barbatos is nothing to scoff at. In the earliest days of existence, two siblings came into reality, tasked with monitoring creation. Along with them came a third being known as the Forger, who was set to watch over creations that would exist in the future. The Forger made its home in the Forge of Worlds inside what would later be named the Dark Multiverse. The Forger created universes based on the hopes and fears of every living thing. And while the stable universes became part of the multiverse, the Forger would dispatch its dragon to destroy the unstable worlds so their energy could be returned to the Forge and recycled. That dragon is Barbatos. Barbatos had a lust for destruction, which eventually led him to take out the Forger and corrupt the World Forge. The unstable worlds persisted beyond their time and became part of the Dark Multiverse field with horrifying realities. He then changed his goals, setting his warpath onto the regular multiverse. Now fast forward multiple centuries, and Barbatos' followers started to secretly prepare Batman to become the doorway for Barbatos to enter the Prime Earth from the Dark Multiverse, causing a big old mess in the DC Multiverse. Number 8. Decimus Furious. Decimus Furious actually began his life all the way back in ancient Rome, where his mother and father took their own lives, leaving Decimus homeless on the streets. In 281 AD, while on the cusp of the afterlife and in incredible pain due to his hunger, this mutant's powers finally activated. He gained superhuman strength and durability alongside an extremely bestial form similar to a Minotaur, but almost as if made of stone, like a Minotaur statue, but cooler. While he is incredibly strong and durable, his even more powerful mutant ability is called Empathic War Infection. This basically means that Decimus can infect anyone who he strikes with a thirst for war, which will send them into a rage-filled state. It also acts as a defensive tool against telepaths who try to read or control his mind, causing the war infection to overcome the telepath. He has also been shown to be able to piece himself back together after being blown up, which is funny because he blew up when Fantomex made him feel love, which did not compute, and he went boom. Decimus became Apocalypse's final horseman of war.
Number 7. Skrulls. The Skrulls have been a part of the comic book universe for a long time, and while some of them have become heroes in recent years, they were initially introduced as villains. In the second issue of Fantastic Four, they were portrayed as an alien race with designs for world domination, hoping to conquer Earth by infiltrating it and basically posing as the Fantastic Four, committing evil deeds. Their goal was to discredit the Fantastic Four and have the FF's own national government and military capture and eliminate them. See, because then Earth would have no protectors and they'd be able to take it for themselves. Look, this was early days of comics, so everyone else wasn't really like as prominent yet. However, the FF managed to capture the Skrull impersonators and posed as them instead, causing the Skrull leader to call off the invasion. They did a little switcheroo there. They were like, we see your plan and we will do it, but we will do it better. In the end, the Skrulls who posed as the FF were left behind and took the form of cows, living in apparent peace on the planet's surface, but isolated from their homeworld and of course their people. Although they didn't seem to mind, I think they were pretty happy as cows. As we saw alluded to in the MCU's Secret Invasion, Skrulls can actually live for hundreds of years, and in the comics their empire has existed for tens of millions of years. Despite them losing that battle though, the Skrulls would not give up on Earth and years later would almost claim it for themselves during the comic book Secret Invasion event, where they were led by the Skrull Queen, Varanki. Number 6. Darkseid. Darkseid is a powerful and formidable villain in the DC Comics universe, ruling over Apokolips with an army of loyal soldiers known as the Parademons. Despite facing challenges and battles against numerous heroes and villains, Darkseid has managed to defeat many of them, including seemingly defeating the entirety of the Justice League on multiple occasions. What sets Darkseid apart from other villains is his sense of inevitability and unstoppable power. This is illustrated by the catchphrase "Darkseid is," which has become iconic in comic book history and was coined by Grant Morrison. The phrase "Darkseid is" basically means that Darkseid is inevitable and all-powerful. You don't have to finish the sentence because he just is. He is an evil constant who must and will always exist, a terrifying thought when you've experienced firsthand his brutal power and iron will. Darkseid's immense strength and ruthless army make him a terrifying and honestly unforgettable villain. Number 5. Raquel. Sure, Raquel might be in prison currently, or at least that's where she was put at the end of the Empire event last I checked, but that doesn't mean she is down and out for the count. Au contraire. Instead, it simply means that she's likely biding her time, and she's eventually once more going to attempt to do something to manipulate her grandson further into unifying and dominating other worlds, as she orchestrated the fusion of the Kree and Skrull together with the Kree-Skrull alliance. And if I've missed anything here, and she's doing something else or she was eliminated, trust me, I do not think she's eliminated. For years we thought she had perished along with the rest of her people when her world was destroyed by Galactus, and for years we were apparently wrong in this. What's to stop her from surprising us yet again, you know what I mean? Number 4. Mandrakk the Dark Monitor. Mandrakk was once, or is, depending on what you believe, Dax Novu. And Dax Novu was once a part of the Monitor. Following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the injuries the Monitor had suffered caused it to basically splinter apart somewhat, dividing its body and creating other smaller monitors. Dax Novu was one of these monitors. He eventually realized that the monitors were parasitic beings who were feeding on the energies of the multiverse, slowly consuming and destroying it. He informed the other monitors, but was basically shunned for attempting to share his realization, and this is pretty much what turned him, well, dark. Dax then became corrupted, turning into a dark monitor known as Mandrakk. Number 3. Thulsa Doom. Conan, the famous barbarian created by Robert E. Howard, has faced many powerful enemies on his adventures. However, he often finds himself in epic battles against evil sorcerers and wizards, as so many barbarians from that age of comics do. One of his most well-known foes, Thulsa Doom, is a necromancer who uses dark magic to achieve his wicked goals. Thulsa Doom made his first comic book appearance way back in Monsters on the Prowl issue number 16 in terms of the comics. Interestingly, Thulsa Doom was originally created as a villain for Robert E. Howard's other barbarian hero, Kull of Atlantis, who was considered by some to be a more complex and well-rounded character than Conan was. However, Thulsa Doom's appearance as the main antagonist in the 1982 film Conan the Barbarian solidified his place in popular culture as one of Conan's greatest enemies, and so that's how we see him today. Number 2. Apokolips. There is a whole reality based on the question of what would happen if Apokolips was basically unable to be stopped. This reality is known as Earth 295, aka the Age of Apokolips, or AOA if you will. And in this world, Apokolips becomes pretty much inevitable thanks to the early demise of one man, Charles Xavier, Professor X. The reality of Age of Apokolips just goes to show you what a force Apokolips is, and if an alternate reality where Apokolips literally rules the world is somehow not enough to convince you of how unstoppable this villain can be, you can also turn to the more recent X-Men event Ten of Swords, which happened a few years ago, aka the Otherworld Tournament. During this fight, Apokolips faced his wife, who was possessed by Annihilation, and even against the seemingly unbeatable foe that was Annihilation, who can pretty much never lose, Apokolips managed to win, saving his wife and freeing her from the influence of the Golden Helm, while also saving basically all of Krakoa, Mutant Kind, and Otherworld. Yeah, so this wasn't his most villainous moment, but normally Apokolips is a villain, and this just serves as another example to show you how he basically can't be stopped. Number 1. Great Darkness. The Great Darkness is in essence one of the oldest evils in the DC multiverse. In the beginning, it was said there was only darkness. However, a small light was also created and eventually it grew. When the creator said, "Let there be light," the darkness was forced to shy away and retreat, but its screams of protest left a mark on the light, a flaw which is believed to basically have become the DC multiverse. At one point, a cult attempted to reawaken the Great Darkness and use it as a weapon to destroy God and reshape all of existence. This created a divide, with various beings allying themselves with the Great Darkness, fighting on the side of hell, while others worked to oppose the entity, allying themselves with the side of heaven, the side of light, if you will. The Great Darkness has long been tied to the stories of heroes like Swamp Thing and John Constantine, making its first appearance in the Swamp Thing series from 1982. Number 10. Anti-Monitor. Anti-Monitor is a supremely powerful villain who threatened the very existence of the multiverse during the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. He controls the antimatter universe, and his very existence is deeply tied to the destruction of all things. So much so that even after the Anti-Monitor was defeated, Necron ended up trapping the Anti-Monitor's body. It was later revealed in Blackest Night that Necron had basically been using Anti-Monitor's corpse as a source of power for the Black Central Power Battery. So yeah, even in death he's scary. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please be sure to show us that you love us by clicking that like button and coming back. Come on back. Number 9. Rotath of Lemuria. Rotath of Lemuria is a prominent figure in the stories from the Hyborian Age. Rotath made his debut in Conan the Barbarian issue number 37, which was published in the 70s during the peak, I would say, of the sword and sorcery genre. The king of Lemuria was scared of Rotath's power, understandably so, as many magic users back in those days of these comics tended to be pretty evil, which Rotath also was. So he hired Kull to defeat and kill him. However, as he was dying, Rotath cursed both the king and Kull and cast a spell so that he could return. He didn't just return too, he came back with a gold body. Number 8. Grail. Grail was born on the same day as Wonder Woman, who is believed to be a few millennia old based on Amazon history, and considering when the Amazons left man's world and how long after that Diana was brought into their world as Hippolyta's daughter. Though that still means that she's likely considerably younger than her father, who is also super old. Grail, the daughter of Amazon assassin Myrna and Darkseid, is the offspring of one of the most feared villains in the DC universe. That's right, we're talking about Darkseid. Darkseid is known for being a powerful adversary to all major superheroes, I'd say, but especially the Justice League. He's a master strategist, he's incredibly strong and durable, and additionally he of course has his Omega beams that he can use to destroy his enemies, or I guess displace them through time.
And in at number 7 is Conquest. Viltrumites, who are featured in Image Comics' Invincible series, are incredibly hardy folk. They have levels of strength and durability akin to Superman without having to be solar charged and without being allergic to big green rocks. They also grow stronger and stronger with both age and experience. One of their oldest, most honored warriors is a Viltrumite by the name of Conquest. Viltrumites live for a very long time. Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man, is a fully adult Viltrumite, and he has lived for thousands and thousands of years, and he has only a small show of white hair to show for it. Of all the Viltrumites seen in the comics, a rare few have fully white hair. Conquest not only has that, but he has lost a lot of his hair, is super wrinkly, and he's also battle scarred and missing an arm. Back in the day, the Viltrumites were exposed to a virus that nearly wiped them out, called the Scourge virus. Conquest was one of the few that survived, but he was left weakened after it left his system, which happened to coincide with his arrival on a planet filled with Ragnar, which are the only species in the universe that can actually kill Viltrumites. So that's where the missing arm and scarring comes from. Conquest is one of the strongest Viltrumites around, and even when his face is turned into tomato soup by Invincible, he still regenerates and comes back for round 2. Number 6. Male Bolgia. And we are sticking with Image Comics for this point, but moving away from Invincible, we are going to talk about Spawn. Now, yes, I am a little lacking in the knowledge department when it comes to Spawn comics, but I do know that the whole reason Al Simmons became a Hellspawn in the first place is because of this guy, the ruler of the 8th sphere of Hell, Male Bolgia. Over 70,000 years ago, this being was created by a past ruler of Hell out of necroplasm rivers, but he was so powerful that he betrayed, overpowered, and took the life of his creator. In order to wage war on heaven and destroy God, he created an army of Hellspawn, but he needed a general, which he couldn't find until he found Al Simmons. He made a deal with a man named Jason Wynn to take Al's life, which is when Male Bolgia made a deal for Al to become his general in exchange for being able to see his wife. But in the end, it didn't really work out too well for this ruler of Hell, did it? Nope. Number 5, Uranos. Okay, technically this guy actually appeared in What If number 24 in September of 1980, but he didn't really do much and was never really mentioned until very recently. Uranos the Undying is an Eternal and one of the deadliest beings in the Marvel Universe. Uranos, like every Eternal, was created by the Celestials 1 million years ago, but he believed the Eternals best fulfilled their purpose if they exterminated both the deviants and humans, all life outside the universe, and imprisoned the Celestials. Luckily, his brothers Kronos and Oceanus disagreed, plunging the Eternals into a civil war. Ultimately, Uranos lost that war and was captured by his brothers and became the first Eternal to be imprisoned within the Exclusion, where he stayed for over 500,000 years because of the failsafe he imposed upon the machine. That failsafe being that if he dies, his greatest celestial designed weapons will be unleashed on the world. Recently, mutants have been revealed to be related to deviants, making the X-Men enemies to the Eternals, and the Eternal Druid called on Uranus for help in Axe Judgment Day number 1. And he definitely did help, as in a matter of 20 minutes, Uranos eradicated Cable, Magneto, and David Haller, otherwise known as Legion, along with a bunch of other powerful Omega level mutants. Number 4, Yuga Khan. Yuga Khan is the first ever tyrannical ruler of the planet of Apokolips, and the father of both Drax, who would become the Infinity Man, and Uxas, who would become Darkseid. Given his nature as essentially a god and one that fathered the current gods, Yuga Khan is certainly ancient, being essentially immortal. As an example, before the fourth world is even fully formed, Yuga Khan alongside his wife, Hegra, and their sons ruled Apokolips, creating one of the most feared empires in the entire universe. But being such an astronomically powerful being, it wasn't enough for him. Yuga Khan was obsessed with becoming the most powerful being in the universe and wanted to be able to essentially control it all. But he was also obsessed with finding out the reason for why it all exists. So he's a conqueror, sure, but he's also a philosopher, which is nice. This obsession is what brought him to the Source Wall, getting trapped in it while trying to unravel the mysteries of the Source. All the inhabitants of New Genesis are way stronger, faster, and smarter than humans, being almost all on a level akin to Superman, while also being immortal. But Yuga Khan, he is the most powerful of them all. So much so that after an absolutely colossal effort, Yuga Khan was even able to break free of the Source Wall. That act released energies that could be felt throughout the galaxy and caused the universe itself to shake. I don't even know how that works. He then replenished his power by absorbing the entire life force of the planet Velos and all its inhabitants, and then did the same thing for millions of other worlds while on his way to Apokolips. His return to Apokolips made everyone tremble, including its current ruler, his son Darkseid, who he imprisoned in the core of the planet. Most recently though, Yuga Khan was one of the beings empowering Shazam during Darkseid War. Number 3, Kulan Gath. Kulan Gath was a sorcerer who lived in Earth's Hyborian era, aka the time of Conan the Barbarian. So yes, he is incredibly ancient. He actually isn't the original Kulan Gath though. Well, he is, and he isn't. You see, Kulan Gath had a slave who poisoned him and assumed his identity. When this Kulan Gath sought out the training of the then Sorcerer Supreme, Mekri Ra, he was refused. He responded by taking the life of and consuming the Sorcerer Supreme, gaining his power. As an enemy of Conan the Barbarian, Kulan was eventually beheaded by the Barbarian, but not before he had become immortal by putting his essence into a magical amulet. So yes, he pulled a Voldemort and made a Horcrux. After the amulet had made its way to Manhattan in the modern era, it ended up in the hands of a mugger, who donned the amulet, allowing Kulan Gath to possess and transform the body of the mugger. Then, he transformed Manhattan into a replica of the time he came from, manipulated the minds of everyone there, and took control of the minds of the Avengers, X-Men, New Mutants, and Morlocks to hunt down Spider-Man. It took the combined powers of Doctor Strange and the mutant magic to change time so that the mugger was killed by Nimrod instead and never possessed by Gath. You know you're a problem when people just go back in time to make sure that you never get back. Number 2, the Great Darkness. So great. You can't get much more ancient than existing before creation. The Great Darkness was the literal darkness and nothingness that existed before the Presence ever came to be. When the Presence, aka God, said, "Let there be light," the Great Darkness is the one who went into hiding. At some point, a clan known as the Brujeria, which is, I think I said that right, attempted a ritual to reawaken the Great Darkness in order to destroy God and reshape the universe. Instead of being completely evil though, it was more like an animal who was confused and didn't understand its power or what its purpose even was. The Great Darkness, also sometimes referred to as the Great Evil Beast, went on a warpath, easily defeating many heroes and waging a solo assault on heaven itself, decimating everything in its way to demand answers from the Presence. It even caused the three main figures of hell to form a union with each other just in case it decided to attack them, which it didn't. When the Great Darkness reached heaven though, it met Swamp Thing, of all people, who taught it the concept of good and evil, explaining that one couldn't survive without the other. The darkness then reached up and God reached back and they became one and the same as yin and yang, or as a balance, that kind of thing. Recently though, the Great Darkness played a large role in the Dark Crisis event. It's basically the overarching villain of the entire DC multiverse, but also, it's kinda just a force of nature. Sort of. Number 1, the Black Winter. You know, Galactus almost made this list, but why choose him when you can choose the bigger, more dangerous, and surprisingly not well known pappy of Galactus? Where Galactus consumes individual planets, the Black Winter devours entire realities. The Black Winter, also known as the Star Plague, the Blight Storm, the Rot Blizzard, or the Thimble Winter, was the one who brought the end to the 6th iteration of the cosmos, leaving only Galen of the planet Ta, the one who becomes Galactus, alive. The Black Winter essentially made Galen his herald, so when the Black Winter arrives in the Marvel Universe in the latest run of Thor, Galactus turns an All-Father Thor who possessed the Thor Force into his Herald of Thunder, granting him the power cosmic, and an attack from this Thor only stops the Black Winter for a total of 14 seconds. That's nuts! That's how powerful this multiversal entity is. But luckily, at this time, the Black Winter isn't here to destroy the universe. He's just here for his herald, Galactus. But still, Thor turns Galactus into a massive power cosmic explosion that destroys the Black Winter completely, and it's incredibly awesome.
Number 10. Chameleon. Chameleon made his first appearance in the very first issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. Although there are a lot of other famous supervillains that people think of when it comes to Peter Parker's gallery of famous and capable rogues, Chameleon was the first that Spider-Man would come up against. In this very first issue, Spider-Man attempted to join the Fantastic Four, who basically fight him due to the fact that they think he's some kind of villain for breaking into the Baxter Building. Of course, Spider-Man was only attempting to do so to impress them so they would invite him to join their team. When they refused to accept him into the team, Spider-Man set on his own to fight crime, and Chameleon disguised himself as Spider-Man to protect his own identity while committing crimes himself, ruining Spidey's reputation and ensuing Peter to go up against Chameleon to put a stop to him. Number 9. Dr. Von Doom and his Doombots. Sounds like a cool band. Dr. Von Doom and his Doombots. We were first introduced to Dr. Doom as a supervillain in issue 5 of the first volume of the Fantastic Four. In his introductory issue, the famous and brilliant villain used his brains and gadgets to capture the Fantastic Four. He wanted them to help him capture Blackbeard's treasure by using a time travel machine that he had constructed to send them into the past. In the end, they tricked him with a chest full of chains, and the thing smashed Dr. Doom to bits, only to find out that the Doom that they were dealing with was actually a robotic copy. The actual Doom also ended up getting defeated as well, and the Fantastic Four got away. But this certainly wouldn't be the last that they would see of Doom, who would become their most iconic foe. Number 8. Miracle Man. What's up with all these original Fantastic Four rogues who kidnapped Invisible Woman, by the way, or Invisible Girl as she was known then? Apparently, kidnapping Sue was a classic villain move back in the day. Miracle Man was originally a stage magician who claimed that he was even more powerful than the Fantastic Four, who just so happened to be in his audience when he was performing. After that he proved this in his stage show, he decided that he should probably become a criminal. He was so talented and smart and obviously, I guess, selfish and villainous somewhat, if he decided to go that route as opposed to the heroic one, that he made the Fantastic Four think that a promotional statue for a film called The Monster of Mars had come to life. While the Fantastic Four were distracted dealing with that whole scenario, he pulled off a series of robberies. But don't worry, he was defeated. After, of course, he kidnapped the Invisible Girl. Like I said, that's a thing that people like to do back in the day. Number 7. Morgan Le Fay. speaking of powerful witches. Morgan Le Fay is a villain we really don't get to showcase or focus on a lot on this channel, so I am taking this opportunity to remind you of just how ancient and how bad she is. Morgan Le Fay is a villain who hails originally from Arthurian legend and was adopted as a character in Marvel Comics all the way back in 1955, making her first appearance in Black Knight issue number 1. But of course, she's actually much older than 1955 in terms of her canon character history. Morgan Le Fay existed just after the ancient and mythical times of the island of Atlantis. In this version of the story, not all of the island was lost, and actually some islands that were part of Atlantis still existed, chiefly Avalon, which is where Morgan was born. Unfortunately, the remaining isles of Atlantis would eventually also be drowned and swallowed up by the sea, causing Morgan, her mother, and the man who would become known as Merlin to flee to Britain. This all happened before the 6th century, with Morgan eventually temporarily becoming Merlin's apprentice. As a villain, Morgan has not only tormented the people of her own time period, but she has also traveled to the present day and threatened the people and heroes of that time as well. Number 6. Barbatos. Barbatos is the Bat God, who basically helped Batman to become what he is today, but as part of his own dark machinations. At least, you know, Barbatos claims to be that. According to Barbatos, he was the Bat that appeared before Bruce the night that he decided to become Batman, inspiring the young Bruce Wayne to go on to don the cape and cowl, and becoming a major symbol for Batman. Barbatos was once the loyal ally of the World Forger. He was a dragon who would destroy worlds that were unstable, often built on fear, known as belonging to the Forge of Worlds. Barbatos, however, grew to enjoy destroying worlds so much that he actually decided to rebel against the World Forger so he could destroy more worlds, ultimately destroying his master, which allowed him to corrupt his Forge of Worlds, with it warping and ultimately becoming known by a name you might be more familiar with, the Dark Multiverse. Just as the World Forger is one of the oldest beings in the cosmos over at DC, so is his pet dragon gone rogue, Barbatos. Barbatos would go on to recruit others to his new purpose to destroy the main multiverse. Number 5. Morlun and the Inheritors. Morlun and the Inheritors sounds like the name of a band of vampires. Not a thing. A coven of vampires, really, I guess I should say. And no, I don't believe they play musical instruments and or perform in any kind of musical acts, sadly. Morlun and the Inheritors are a threat that we meet as we go into the Spider-Verse. They were the main antagonists of the Spider-Verse event in the comics, which promised to feature all the alternate Spider-Men, women, and folks that had ever featured. And they were also the main antagonists of the follow-up event, Spider-Geddon. The Inheritors are basically energy vampires that feed specifically on what is known as totemic life energy. What is that? What is a totem? It is usually a superpowered or somewhat unique individual who represents some kind of powerful animal instinct or arachnid avatar, like spiders! Morlun specifically is well known for being a main villain of Spider-Man's, and while he's not as prominently featured as, you know, some of other Spidey's villains, he is still particularly powerful. We don't really know, I don't think, how old the Inheritors or Morlun are, at least not in their first life, but we do know they're pretty old, having participated in fights in the multiverse seemingly a long time ago. Also, you know, they'd like to dress up super Victorian, so they gotta at least be from that era or beyond, although they're not necessarily Earth-based villains, they're multiversal villains. Number 4. Sin. Sin might be one that people are a little bit more familiar with in another form, but also there might be a lot of you out there who aren't, as this villain hails from the Spawn comics. If you are up to date with your Spawn reading, then you know who I'm talking about here, but for those of you who aren't up to date, or you know, maybe have never read Spawn, this villain was actually formerly known as a longtime ally of Al Simmons' Spawn, his mentor in a way, Cogliostro. While initially just seeming like a well-meaning fellow Hellspawn, seeking to teach Al the ropes and also help to guide him away from being fully used as a pawn of hell, Cogliostro is actually later revealed to be more ancient than we might have otherwise thought, in fact also being known by another name even before he was known as Cog. Cain. Yeah, the Cain. The man from biblical myth who killed his brother and was condemned for it. Cain of Cain and Abel. After revealing that he was really only helping Spawn to serve his own interests and becoming a villain, Cog was redeemed once more for a short little while before becoming a villain again, who has the ability to drain the power of other Hellspawns, being known now as Sin. sin with two ends. Number 3. Rama-Tut. While we all know Kang the Conqueror now, thanks to him being featured in the MCU and Quantumania, and the hype for his inclusion in that film being very real, I would say at this point, not everyone is as familiar with the other versions of Nathaniel Richards from Earth 6311. Despite the fact that this is a villain from the future, Kang actually has existed across time in many different forms, adopting the form even of an ancient pharaoh. This was back when Kang was a ruler in ancient Egypt, before he was really even Kang. Nathaniel Richards became obsessed with the reality of Earth 616 and would eventually construct a time machine shaped like a sphinx and use it to travel back in time to around 2960 BC. Having brought with him a robotic army and advanced futuristic weapons, it wasn't long before Nathaniel was the ruler of Egypt, taking the name of Rama-Tut. This version of Nathaniel also became focused and obsessed on the creation of En-Sabah-Nur, who, as Rama-Tut knew, was destined to become the world's first mutant. Number 2. Perpetua. Perpetua is one of those characters who is super powerful and who tons of people should know about, really, just for that reason alone, I would say. But no. Instead, most folks know more about the Anti-Monitor, Perpetua's son, than they do about her. Granted, this could be because she's simply a newer character, and in that case, I mean, fair enough. She's a newer character, but she's also really old because she's kind of like a retcon character. Perpetua is known for being the first one to create the multiverse, or at least, you know, one of the first people, depending on how you like to reconcile DC lore, because I feel like Perpetua isn't the first one that we've said that about. While Anti-Monitor is the character most well known for causing the Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's later revealed that Perpetua was the one truly pulling his strings and therefore responsible for this crisis. In fact, Perpetua feeds off Crisis energy and is said to have been responsible for all crises we've seen. At least all crises we've seen before Dark Crisis, likely, since I think she was dead when that one actually took place, so, or at least defeated. Is she still alive? I don't think so. Number 1. Rotath of Lemuria. Heading back to the Hyborian Age once again on one of our ancient lists, which by the way, if you want to visit the Hyborian Age again and again, you should check out part 1 and part 2 of our ancient superheroes list. We got you. Rotath of Lemuria is a common example of how magic was presented often in stories from the Hyborian Age, especially in regards to Conan's story there. Rotath made his first appearance in issue number 37 of Conan the Barbarian from the 70s, when everyone was into the sword and sorcery genre. In this same issue, Rotath was killed by Kull after he was hired by the king of Lemuria, who was frightened of Rotath's power. As he died though, Rotath cursed both the king and Kull, casting a spell so that he might return. And so he did, this time in a golden body, but still he ended up being defeated, this time not by Kull directly, but instead of course after fighting Conan and Juma, and also being defeated by a giant slug, which that part is a little random, but hey, I'll take it. Number 10. Vandal Savage. Vandal Savage is definitely one of the most ancient villains out there. It's actually kinda like his whole thing. Savage originally existed all the way back in the prehistoric ages, having initially been a caveman. He got his powers from a radioactive meteorite which granted him immortality and enhanced intelligence. Even way back then, he was fighting heroes like Batman, if you can believe it. This was after Batman was sent on some time adventures after facing off against Darkseid. While he was suspected as being dead, in reality Darkseid's Omega Sanction had simply banished Batman to wander through time, which actually kinda sounds nice to me, except that part of this punishment was that his lives that he would experience were all supposed to be, well, pretty awful. Still though, when facing off against Vandal Savage, even with Vandal's somewhat newfound powers, Batman won. I mean, you can be ancient and immortal, but that doesn't mean that you're immune from being beaten by Batman, right? Batman's got that plot armor, baby. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we're doing here on Top 10 Nerd, and you love when I talk about supervillains, I know I do, be sure to check out our supervillains playlist over on the channel for even more good villainous content. Number 9. Surtur. Surtur is not someone we think of too often or even touch on, but he's a pretty big deal in the comics, and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, in the MCU, he successfully managed to destroy Asgard, fulfilling his prophesized role in Ragnarok. And what's more, Thor knew that this was what needed to be done in order to stop his sister Hela. So despite facing off against Surtur initially, he ended up having to be the one to free him so that the prophecy could actually be realized, sacrificing the place of Asgard in order to save the people of Asgard. In the comics, Surtur is an ancient foe, having been the sworn enemy of Odin for well, pretty much forever. He hails from Muspelheim, and even for years successfully stopped Odin from achieving an alliance between the people of Odin's own Asgardian tribe, the Aesir, and the other Asgardian tribe known as the Vanir. Number 8. Circe. Circe is amazing. Definitely one of my favorite ancient villains around, possibly one of my favorite DC villains of all time around. Being that she is also the Circe from ancient Greek myth, I think you can understand just how old she is. Circe is known for being a powerful witch, and in the Prime Earth continuity was also revealed to be one of Hecate's witch marked. Her insane magical ability is how she has been able to survive for so long, without also appearing to have aged much at all. However, I will also add that in the New Earth continuity, this is also thanks to the fact that Circe is actually descended from Titans, which not only makes her immortal and ageless, but also pretty durable as well. Circe is known for being a powerful Wonder Woman foe, but despite the fact that Wonder Woman is really well known among comic fans, I feel like her villains get less time in the spotlight for, I don't know, for some reason, despite the fact that Wonder Woman actually has a pretty stacked rogues gallery all her own. And like Circe, many of them also seem to have a rich and interesting history. Seriously, I feel like Circe could just have her own comic series. That's how much she has and has had going on throughout her life and throughout the comics.
Number 7. Horticulture. You know, sometimes a group of villains comes along that just kinda makes me smile. And Horticulture, who first appeared in X-Men Volume 5 number 3 in December 2019, are one such group. Horticulture is described on their wiki as a group of agrochemists, biotechnologists, and eugenic engineers who specialize in the genetic manipulation and propagation of all things botanical. So, to me and my tiny brain, I take that information and translate it to, it's a bunch of old plant scientist ladies. Because that's what they are. It's a bunch of older ladies who are seeking to radically depopulate humans from the Earth in order to bring the Earth and nature to a state of balance. With the climate the way it is right now, it's actually kind of an understandable cause, even if it's utterly insane. Using their know-how, they made biological modifications to themselves, like resistance to telepathy and extended lifespans, but they also developed technology to manipulate their environment, inhibit mutant powers, and generate illusions on men. But they also have experience as computer programmers, being able to access the Krakoan gateways and trade information with the villainous anti-mutant group known as Orcus. Number 6. Old Loki from the MCU. Alright, I'm going to step away from the pages of comic books altogether here. During the MCU's Loki show, Loki gets sent to the Void, where the whole place is basically filled with other alternate versions of himself. But he specifically became part of a group of 4 other Lokis. Boastful Loki, Alligator Loki, Kid Loki, and the topic for today, Classic Loki. Classic Loki had a similar story to regular Loki from the Sacred Timeline, but when confronted by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, this Loki decided to use duplication magic to survive the whole thing. He then spent a hell of a long time on a remote planet, ashamed of the nefarious things he had done over time. When he finally tried to return to see his brother, Thor, who he missed, he was an older man, and them meeting caused a divergent timeline, getting himself pruned and sent to the Void. He has probably one of the best moments in the show. When Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius try to escape from the Void, and the reality-consuming Alioth tries to stop them, Classic Loki uses his magic to create a true-to-life, massive illusion of Asgard itself. All while this weird version of Ride of the Valkyries was playing in the background, distracting Alioth and giving me just straight-up goosebumps. Like, I am actually getting them right now just thinking about it. Like, it was such a cool moment. Satisfying. Number 5. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul was born around 700 years ago, and thanks to the Lazarus Pits, he has been able to keep his body in working order. But he discovered the pits when he was an older gentleman and keeps the look of someone with a significant amount of years to him. After he came in contact with the pits, he eventually became a master martial artist and a master fencer, gaining a massive amount of wealth, and he started creating organizations to rid the world of crime, with his first being called the Demon, which the later League of Assassins is a branch of. Rage's purpose within the League of Assassins is to eliminate all evil in the world by destroying all of humanity and just starting all over. Obviously, that mentality means he routinely has run-ins with the superhero community, especially Batman, who he helped train. Rage has had many plans over the years that tried to destroy the world, and he has also beaten the entire JLA when he discovered Batman's notes. Now, with his years of experience and his vast amount of accumulated resources, this older fellow is a massive threat to both the heroes and the world. Number 4. The Joker. During the absolutely fantastic Three Jokers storyline, we learn there have actually been 3 Jokers plaguing Gotham over the years, and among the 3 of them is the Golden Age Joker, and he is clearly much older than the other 2. Now, to be completely transparent here, whether this story is canon or not is an area of debate, so it's up to you if this one counts, but the Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, is the only one of the 3 Jokers to be a predominantly serious crime lord, and he even says that laughing and smiling is physically painful for him. Another thing that makes this entry a little arguable is that of these 3 Jokers, we don't know which one, if any of them, is the Joker. Even if only one remains in the end, the best part of this story is the uncertainty about which one is the one who started it all. Now, seeing as the Criminal is the oldest, classic version, he seems to be the one who started it all, creating more Jokers to mess with Batman. But the other 2 Jokers have been featured in incredibly important Batman stories as well. The comic really explores all of it, and if you haven't yet, make sure you check out Batman 3 Jokers as soon as possible. Number 3. Maestro. The Incredible Hulk has certainly been through the ringer in his decorated career, but few versions of the character are the living embodiment of that fact, like the Maestro. An alternate version of Bruce Banner from an apocalyptic future, this version of the character is far more intense and complex, but also much older. The best way to explain Maestro is to say that he is basically a smarter, older, villainous version of Dr. Bruce Banner with all the powers and abilities of the original, but with a touch of nuclear radiation. He has much more of a cosmic and spiritual side to him than the normal Hulk does, but he is also twice as strong as Hulk is, and he retains all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, but with years and years more experience. Despite all that extra strength, brain power, and experience, he still gets outmaneuvered by the Hulk, who sends Maestro back in time to the site of the Gamma Bomb that created them. But even then, the Maestro's spirit remains on the bones left behind after the explosion went off and he came back to life. Number 2. Agatha Harkness. Like a few of these villains, when we first met Agatha Harkness in Fantastic Four number 94 from October of 1969, she was already elderly. She started out as the nanny for the newly born Franklin Richards, and using her magical powers, she even saved the Fantastic Four from the Frightful Four and a handful of other villains, and also helped Franklin when his powers first started to emerge. But she went on to have an interesting relationship with the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, but also her mother, Natalia Maximoff. That's because this sweet nanny Agatha is actually an incredibly ancient sorcerer who was around to remember the sinking of Atlantis nearly 18,000 years ago. And she was probably the most powerful of the original witches during the Salem witch trials, an event that she actually supported as she thought it would cull the weak magic users who held them back. Agatha, like a lot of older villains, is pretty damn complex. She has helped out heroes on multiple occasions, but she's also done some pretty sinister stuff. But there's no doubt that she is much stronger than both heroes and villains first assume. Number 1. Baron von Strucker. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker was born in the 19th century, so he ain't a young fella by any means. He fought with the Axis powers during World War II alongside and under the Red Skull. He was a top villain at the time, not just for Captain America, but more prominently as an adversary for Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. And that carried through after the war ended, as Strucker was instrumental in the rise of Hydra and then became the Supreme Hydra. He was even responsible for the corruption of S.H.I.E.L.D., using Hydra to completely take over large parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. When Captain America returned, and then the Red Skull did as well, Strucker began to lose his leadership role within Hydra, and so he faked his own passing, choosing to instead manipulate events from the shadows. Eventually though, Strucker got the Death Spore virus, which is why he is on this list. He's old, and many people don't know he has this particular enhancement. While he is an excellent strategist, a highly intelligent, exceptional hand-to-hand combatant, swordsman, and marksman who uses Hydra tech to live longer and be in top physical condition, the Death Spore virus bonded Strucker's DNA with the Death Spore itself, enabling him to be revived after passing away. He hasn't aged since getting the virus, he heals at an incredible rate, is invulnerable to minor injuries, resistant to toxins and disease, and he can even release the death spore virus from his body at will, taking his victims' lives nearly instantly if he chooses. And for this list, starting off at number 10 is Magneto. Starting off this list with the absolute GOAT. Magneto has been around for a long time, and a majority of that time he was a villain, or at best an anti-hero. As the #1 rival of Professor Charles Xavier, Magneto's view of the world is pretty interesting given that he was the child of a Jewish family during World War II, and yet, after years of persecution for being a mutant, he believed his race to be superior to regular humans nonetheless, and that humans should be subservient or destroyed. Under this mentality, he led the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants as well as other groups against the X-Men and the Earth's heroes. Now everybody knows that Magneto is not someone you mess with. He has enough power and enough experience to stomp almost anyone. For example, while he has become more of just a hero nowadays, there's a point where he gets his heart ripped out by a villain called Uranos. But he keeps himself alive by using his powers to keep his blood flowing. He's just that insanely powerful. But being born around World War II and the rival to Charles Xavier, he's been up there in the age department since he was introduced, but always manages to decimate his enemies. Number 9, Cassandra Nova. Sticking with X-related heroes, we have the evil twin, or counterpart, or anti-self to Charles Xavier. Cassandra Nova isn't really a mutant, but she isn't really a person either. She is actually what is known as a Mumadrai, the spirit that is equal to the opposite of a person. Wrap your head around that one. This is about to get wild, so buckle up. Because of the genetic mutant potential of Charles Xavier, his Mumadrai was able to create a physical form for itself when Sharon Xavier was pregnant with Charles, making Cassandra basically Xavier's twin. Now Charles, even as a baby, sensed Cassandra as an evil presence, and he used his psychic abilities to try and take her out in the womb. Cassandra survived though, and so she spent decades as this terrifying mass of cells in a sewer, building herself a new body and planning her revenge on her brother. Cassandra has all the same telepathic powers as Charles himself, plus some telekinetic abilities as well. But being a Mumadrai, she has the terrifying ability to manipulate DNA, breaking it down, copying it, and being able to construct physical bodies. She can even phase through solid objects, regenerate insanely fast, and enhance and evolve other mutant abilities. Number 8, Granny Goodness. Stepping away from Marvel for a moment, Granny Goodness is probably the complete opposite of anything we would describe as goodness. She was originally one of the lowlies, which is basically the peasant class on DC Universe's Apocalypse. From a younger age, she was taken by Darkseid and raised and trained to become head of the Shock Troops and the Female Furies. She has the responsibility to bring young warriors from other worlds to fight each other to earn the right to be trained by her. But Granny Goodness also has multiple orphanages where she both trains and disciplines younger individuals looking for potential warriors for Darkseid. Now being a resident of Apocalypse, Granny here does have quite a bit of power. She has superhuman strength, speed, durability, and senses, as well as invulnerability and an advanced immune system and immortality. But being immortal doesn't necessarily save you from looking old as hell, which is why we get Granny Goodness.
Number 7, Skrulls. That's right, Skrulls are some of the oldest villains around. Did you know that? I know, it's pretty surprising. Although they aren't exactly considered clean-cut villains anymore. They have even teamed up with Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, before to help save the universe. Originally, however, the Skrulls appeared in Fantastic Four Volume 1, Issue 2, and were hell-bent on invading Earth. This was right after the FF team had been introduced, which was basically all that Issue 1 was about, an origin story. The Skrulls knew that the FF were the main protectors of Earth, despite the fact that they'd sort of just started their superhero career, which is kinda weird. Anyways, they decided to impersonate the FF, commit a bunch of villainous deeds while impersonating them in order to frame them and have Earth's military capture and kill the Fantastic Four team, so that the Skrulls might then invade Earth with no one powerful enough to put a stop to them. Of course, this plan was foiled when the FF trapped the imposters, unmasked them as Skrulls, and ended up posing as those Skrulls to tell the Skrull leader that Earth's defenses were too powerful for the invasion to succeed, thus scaring them off. Basically, they defeated an entire Skrull invasion in that comic, so that's pretty impressive. The Skrulls that originally posed as the Fantastic Four members were forced to stay behind after the invasion left, because obviously the Fantastic Four was not going to let them go back up onto that ship. So they then decided to take the form of cows and continue to live on Earth in apparent peace. Peaceful cows. Apparently they'd rather be anything but Skrulls. So they said in the comic, which I thought, oh, that's kind of like rude. I'm sure there are Skrulls that really like being Skrulls. Ugh. Number 6. Dr. Sivana. If you've seen the film Shazam, you likely are familiar with Dr. Sivana, or if you're aware of the Captain Marvel / Shazam comics. He was one of the first villains that Shazam actually came up against and made his comic book debut in Whiz Comics issue number 2. His first master plot of villainy? To ransom radio waves. The 1940s, what a time. He asked for $50 million and if he wasn't paid, threatened to create radio silence everywhere. Because this was the 40s, of course, that was a really big deal. Although right now we'd probably be like, who listens to the radio? But also $50 million is an insane amount of money to ask for. I feel like if Dr. Sivana hadn't been so greedy, it might have worked out better for him. Because $50 million in the 1940s? Jeez! In the end, Billy Batson and his Captain Marvel form defeated Sivana by smashing his radio silencer tech, which was like this huge machine by the way, to smithereens. But as promised, the Doctor would return to battle Captain Marvel, or as he's known now, Shazam, again, becoming one of his mainstay villains. Number 5. Joe Chill. While we didn't know who he was at the time, Joe Chill would go on to become a huge supervillain in Batman's life. He would be known to Bruce Wayne as the man responsible for the death of Batman's parents. Well, responsible. More, he was known as the perpetrator. The circumstances surrounding the murder of Martha and Thomas Wayne in regards to it being part of a great plot or just a random mugging gone wrong would continue to be explored even after we found out Joe Chill's name. Either way, Joe Chill has been a huge villain in Batman's life anyways, because he took away Bruce Wayne's parents, which is kinda Batman's whole thing. Number 4. The Monk. The Monk first appeared in Detective Comics issue number 31, shortly after Batman's first appearance a few issues previously. He is often dressed in red robes, but his first appearance also featured him wearing a red cloth bag with eye holes on his head, marked with a skull and crossbones. So stylish. This was way back when Bruce Wayne also had a fiancée named Julie. The Monk ends up hypnotizing and kidnapping Julie. Batman, however, ends up chasing him down and facing a castle filled with booby traps in order to save his fiancée, who does not know apparently that her betrothed Bruce is actually the Bat. The issue ends with Batman swearing vengeance, soaring off to Hungary to find the Monk and his werewolves? I just love that part because I'm always like, wait, what do you mean you're going after his werewolves? He has werewolves? What? Did we find that out in that issue? I don't remember that being mentioned, but maybe I forgot. Number 3. Dr. Death. While his New 52 appearance is terrifying, Dr. Death actually first appeared in Detective Comics Volume 1, issue number 29, and looked just like your average mad scientist guy. He was one of the first supervillains that Batman ever encountered and is often known as a producer of biological weapons. You know, evil mad science stuff. Like most of Batman's supervillains, he isn't superpowered himself. His first appearance saw him being apprehended by Batman only to go down in a blaze of flames, though at least Batman tried to stop him from going down in a blaze of glory by tossing a fire extinguisher at him. So helpful, Batman, thanks for that. Needless to say, this wouldn't be the end of Dr. Death and we would definitely see him again. Now he's got that crazy bone serum that just makes bones grow everywhere. Used it himself, so he's got these crazy teeth. You should show them the picture. Number 2. Ultra Humanite. One of Superman's first foes before Lex Luthor even. I know, it's crazy. If you haven't noticed yet, comics both seemed to act as a celebration for science while also having an obsession for its less honorable uses via mad science, as we like to call it. That's its own category of science for you science nerds out there. Just kidding. I know mad science isn't an actual category. but it should be. Apparently old school views were that science is awesome but can also be super dangerous, which, I mean, true. Ultra Humanite's brand of mad science came in the form of body swapping. A brilliant mind trapped in a frail, old, crippled body, Geralt dreamed of setting himself free of his decrepit and failing body and conquering the world. Just normal dreams, you know how it is. Becoming Ultra Humanite, he is known for inhabiting various female bodies in the DC universe, including Terra's for a time. Kinda weird. And for inhabiting the body of an albino ape. Those are his things. He's into apes and swapping bodies with ladies. It's normal. It's fine. Number 1. Namor. The Submariner appeared even before Marvel was called Marvel. Well, now he is definitely more anti-hero, and he never really has been a bad guy when it comes to him as a character. He's definitely also a bit of a jerk with a dark side, even when he's acting heroically, which, not going to lie, is part of the reason that I think we all love him so much. He's just so complex. He can be anything he wants or anything he needs to be. A villain, a hero, an anti-hero. However, when he was first introduced in the Fantastic Four comics in issue number 4 of volume 1 in the early 60s, way after his initial introduction in April of 1939, I know, it was as a villain to the Fantastic Four. After remembering his life as Prince of the Sea, Namor returns to his lost home of Atlantis only to find that it had been destroyed by the radioactive pollution of atomic tests. He seeks vengeance, and the Fantastic Four must stop him as he aims to attack the land, destroying the city and causing harm to the land dwellers who he deems responsible for the destruction of his home. Which was very villainous at the time, but I feel like now a lot of us are cool with this because we're like, hey, you know, the ocean's real polluted, so like, yeah, fair enough. Also, they really did that. They really used to set off atomic bomb tests underwater. That's a thing that we did. Shame on us.
Number 10. Fu Manchu. This villain is more remembered for the facial hair he inspired and for being an incredibly offensive stereotype than he is for his fictional acts of villainy. Fu Manchu was created all the way back in 1912 by an English author named Sax Rohmer after he asked a Ouija board how he would make his fortune, and I swear this is true, the board spelled out a racial slur that inspired him to come up with the character. Dr. Fu Manchu has studied at various universities and has 4 doctorates. He is a crime boss who uses members of various secret societies as his enforcers, as well as various dangerous exotic animals like cobras and spiders to attack his enemies. His goal is to take over the world so that he can restore China to its former glory. He has a daughter named Falo Sui who is frequently trying to usurp him by teaming up with the heroes who are trying to defeat him. He is most frequently paired against the heroes of the novels, Dennis Nayland Smith and Dr. Petrie. He is one of the first supervillains in fiction, but his legacy is far overshadowed by the fact that he is directly responsible for starting the yellow panic trope in fiction, where Asian characters began being consistently written as plotting and dangerous masterminds trying to bring down the white man. He has had a permanent impact on fiction as a result, inspiring other dicey characters like Marvel's The Mandarin. Number 9. The Fly. The problem with having heroes who kill their villains is that you don't get many recurring enemies as a result. This is especially true for the pulp hero known as the Spider, who is a millionaire who dresses up in a disguise and brutally murders his opponents. He is a character known for his bloodlust, kind of like the Punisher of his time, but one of the few villains who managed to give the Spider any repeated trouble was the Fly. First appearing in the August 1934 issue of Spider magazine in the story Prince of the Red Looters, the Fly is also a wealthy playboy who has become bored and decides to take up crime as a hobby. At the story's start, he has killed 4 men and stolen $50,000. Despite most of the criminal underworld being terrified of the Spider, the Fly places an ad in the paper with an invitation saying, "Won't you come into my parlor?" The two meet and the Fly challenges the Spider to a sword fight. The 2 men are evenly matched and the Fly eventually pulls a gun, but being the sporting type, he doesn't kill him and instead ties the Spider up and leaves him for the police. The Fly goes on to rob a bank, leaving a massive trail of carnage in his wake. He is smart enough to deduce that the Spider is really Richard Wentworth and makes several assassination attempts on him. He sends his stolen goods in the mail to the various gangsters of the city in order to earn their support and uses his newfound syndicate to rob several banks across the city. By the end of the story, the Spider and the Fly engage in another sword fight that seems to end with the Fly's death, but in a move that was highly unusual in the Spider magazine. He returned a year and a half later in the story Green Globes of Death, where he developed gas weapons that caused his victims to bleed from every pore. As I mentioned in my hero version of this video, Spider stories were incredibly violent, with death tolls routinely going into the thousands by the end of each book. Number 8. Voodoo Master. One of the recurring foes of the Shadow is Dr. Rodil McQuino, who has hypnotic powers that he has attained through the use of black magic, which allow him to take control of people's minds and make them a part of his mindless zombie-like horde. He used these abilities to come to New York and start a cult, which he used to attain wealth. This brought him into conflict with the Shadow, who shot him and presumed him dead. Unfortunately, Voodoo Master returned and began an experiment which he planned to run on the entire human race. He planned to gain a massive amount of followers in the United States, but felt that the machine age was making this more difficult to accomplish. So, once he settled in the town of Hampstead and began enacting his scheme, he also began destroying the city's various factories. The Voodoo Master made 3 appearances in the original Shadow magazine stories before being permanently killed off, but he is also a recurring character in the Dynamite Entertainment comic book series featuring the Shadow.
Alright, number 7. Yuga Khan. Yuga Khan is the first ever tyrannical ruler of the planet of Apokolips, and the father of both Drax, who would become the Infinity Man, and Uxas, who would become Darkseid. Given his nature as essentially a god, and one that fathered the current gods, quote unquote, Yuga Khan is certainly ancient, being essentially immortal. As an example, before the 4th world is even fully formed, Yuga Khan alongside his wife Hegra and their sons ruled Apokolips, creating one of the most feared empires in the entire universe. But being such an astronomically powerful being, it wasn't enough. Yuga Khan was obsessed with becoming the most powerful being in the universe and wanted to be able to essentially control it all. But he was also obsessed with finding out the reason for why it all existed in the first place. So he's a conqueror, but also a philosopher, which is nice. This obsession is what brought him to the Source Wall, getting trapped in it while trying to unravel the mysteries of the Source. All the inhabitants of New Genesis are way stronger, faster, and smarter than humans, being almost all on a level akin to Superman, while also being immortal, but Yuga Khan, he is the most powerful of them all. So much so that after an absolutely colossal effort, Yuga Khan was even able to break free of the Source Wall. That act released energies that could be felt throughout the galaxy and caused the universe itself to shake. He then replenished his power by absorbing the entire life force of the planet Velos and all its inhabitants, and then did the same thing with millions of other worlds while on his way back to Apokolips. His return to Apokolips made everyone tremble, including its current ruler, his own son, Darkseid, who he imprisoned in the core of the planet. Most recently though, Yuga Khan was one of the beings empowering Shazam during Darkseid War.
Mine are so Conan. I went really Conan with this list.
I respect that though.
I mean, there's lots of old guys, cause
Mine are all like spacey.
Yeah, it's so true though. Space is old. Number 6, Kulan Gath. Kulan Gath is probably one of the most iconic villains that Conan the Barbarian has had in the comics. He is so old, in fact, that he also became the enemy of another ancient villain known as the Mutant External, more specifically, Selene. Not to be confused with the Eternals, who are their own thing entirely. These are the Externals, not the Eternals. Kulan Gath made his first full feature appearance back in 1972 in the comics in Conan the Barbarian issue number 15.
Number 5. Larfleeze. Larfleeze, or Agent Orange, is one unique character in the emotional spectrum, and that's because he's the sole wielder of the Orange Light of Avarice. He is the only member of the Orange Lantern Corps. Larfleeze is driven by an insatiable greed that grants him dominion over all that he desires, driving him into conflict with whoever possesses what it is that he desires, and over the power of the Orange Lanterns, which represent greed. His power is centered on his ability to conjure constructs using the stolen identity and forms of those he has absorbed into his horde, making him basically an army unto himself. This ability extends even to abstract concepts and beings, showcasing the extent of his control. The big thing about Larfleeze is that since he's spent so much time with his Orange Lantern and ring, he has basically become the Orange Lantern and ring himself. This energy grants him huge levels of power. His constructs are virtually indestructible and can overwhelm even the most powerful opponents. However, Larfleeze's power comes at the cost of his individuality. reality, as his insatiable greed makes him less of a person and more of a living embodiment of greed itself. Even without the power of the Orange Lanterns though, his race is already basically immortal, with Larfleeze himself being billions of years old, and with enough power that I seriously doubt he'll be going down anytime soon.
Number 4. Thulsa Doom. When it comes to Conan, he definitely has a type when it comes to some of his greatest enemies. Typically, he's caught in the midst of epic battles against evil sorcerers or wizards. In Thulsa Doom's case, his brand of evil magic user is Necromancer. While Thulsa Doom became a famous Conan villain thanks to his appearance as the main antagonist in the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie, he initially started out as a villain for what some consider to be a more nuanced barbarian hero also created by Robert E. Howard, Kull of Atlantis, or Kull the Conqueror, as he was also known.
Number 3. Shuma-Gorath. Yes, it is a giant tentacled eyeball, but hold off on the laughter because Shuma-Gorath the Destroyer, the Conqueror of Midnight, the All-Killer of the Dawn, is a ridiculously ancient being and greatest of the old gods, or the many angled ones. Among his many powers is the ability to communicate with and control others nearby and across entire dimensions. He can create and direct powerful blasts of mystical energy and affect transmutations on a planetary scale. His skin alone is difficult to damage even with the most powerful of magics. While his form seems pretty silly, cause it is, it's actually only a shell containing his power, and he can alter this appearance however he sees fit. This is actually because it's not even his true form. His true form is apparently not even comprehensible to us humans. Boo. Shuma-Gorath can destroy multiple galaxies solely through his aura pressure, and this old god has also the ability to destroy entire realities. He is the most powerful in his home dimension, just like others of his kind, and only part of his power has actually appeared on Earth. And with the stuff he has done with that fraction of power, that should tell you just how powerful he is.
Number 2. Skrulls. All of them. There's many. They're not all bad, but they started bad. That's right, Skrulls are some of the oldest villains around, although they aren't exactly considered clean-cut villains anymore. In fact, some Skrulls have even become better known as heroes in recent years. Originally though, Skrulls appeared as a villainous alien race in Fantastic Four Volume 1, Issue Number 2, and who were focused solely, during their appearance, on basically conquering Earth. This was right after the FF team had been introduced in the previous issue, which was basically all Issue 1 was really about, the team's origin story. The Skrulls knew that the FF were the main protectors of Earth, at this point anyways, despite the fact that they had just sorta, started their superhero careers, which is pretty crazy. Knowing this, the Skrulls decided to pose as the FF and commit a bunch of villainous deeds while impersonating them, hoping to discredit the Fantastic Four to the point that the US military would capture and then kill the Fantastic team. With the Fantastic Four disposed of, the Earth would then be ripe for the Skrulls' taking. Of course, this plan was foiled as the FF trapped the imposters and ended up posing as them, taking the Skrulls' idea but executing it much better. Disguised as the Skrulls, the FF would tell the Skrull leader that Earth's defenses were too powerful for the invasion to succeed, causing them to just call off the invasion. The Skrulls that originally posed as the Fantastic Four members were forced to stay behind after the invasion left, taking the form of cows and living in apparent peace, as they apparently really enjoyed living as cows. Skrulls themselves can live hundreds of years, and their empire has existed for tens of millions of years, which means those cows are gonna be really old.
Can you imagine you're like millions of years old conquerors, and then you go to the planet, you make all your all the way there, and then someone's like, you know what, I think it's gonna be too hard, and they're just like, you're right, let's just go.
You're right.
You're right, we should just go.
And then those guys are just like, why don't we just be cows?
And
that's your life.
Moo. Number 1, the Great Darkness. You can't get much more ancient than existing before creation itself. The Great Darkness was the literal darkness and nothingness that existed before the Presence ever came to be. When the Presence, aka God in DC Comics, said, "Let there be light," the Great Darkness is the one who went into hiding. At some point, a clan known as the Brujeria, I believe is how you pronounce it, attempted a ritual to reawaken the Great Darkness in order to destroy God and reshape the universe. Instead of being completely evil though, this was more like an animal who was confused and didn't understand its power or what its purpose even was in the universe. The Great Darkness, also sometimes referred to as the Great Evil Beast, went on a warpath, easily defeating many heroes and waging a solo assault on heaven itself, decimating everything in its way to demand answers from the Presence. It even caused the 3 main figures of Hell to form a union with each other just in case something went wrong. When the Great Darkness reached heaven though, it met Swamp Thing of all people, couple who taught it the concept of good and evil, explaining that one couldn't survive without the other. The darkness then reached up and God reached back, and they became one and the same as like yin and yang, or as a balance. Recently though, the Great Darkness played a large role in the Dark Crisis event. It's basically the overarching villain of the entire DC multiverse, but also just kind of force of nature doing its thing.
Number 10. Namor. While many folks think of Namor as being an anti-hero, and honestly he most definitely is, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe he's only really been presented to us as like a straight up villain. Albeit a straight up villain with a pretty powerful and universally relatable motive, I would say. He does what he does in an effort to protect his people and to defend the oceans from those who would pollute and destroy them. AKA, that's us. I think we can all get behind that message. I know I can, as someone that, you know, doesn't want our oceans to bubble and boil and just be filled with garbage. However, Namor's methods honestly could use some work from a heroic standpoint. Namor is presented as being both brutal and cruel when it comes to his actions, which makes him a villain in the MCU. While he is around 100 years old in the comics at this point, his live action adaptation was made considerably older and is estimated based on his origin to actually be around 500 years old. Woo!
Number 9. Black Adam. Another anti-hero? I promise this won't be a common occurrence. There are two main different origin stories for Black Adam. In the pre-New 52 era of DC, circa 1200 BC, the wizard Shazam became a high priest to the pharaoh Ramses II of Egypt. This is where he met the young prince Teth Adam of Kahndaq. Ramses' son. There we go. Teth Adam impressed the wizard with his fairness and decency, and boom, he was granted the power. But in the more recent continuity, Teth Adam was born in Egypt in the 26th century BCE along the banks of the Nile as part of the Kandaki tribe, and it did not take long for him to be forced into a life of unwilling servitude. Very different. His entire family lost their lives except for his nephew Aman. Aman would save Teth Adam's life, which got him the recognition of the wizard Shazam, who turned Aman into his champion. Aman then shared this power with his uncle Teth Adam, but not seeing eye to eye on how to use the power, Black Adam took his own nephew off of the board and stole the power for himself. This was before he was either banished, stuck in a scarab, or locked away in a tomb, depending on which era you want to talk about. But no matter when we are talking about, Black Adam has been a threat to everyone, and he took on almost the entire world when his family was taken from him back in DC's World War III.
Number 8. Rotath of Lemuria. Rotath of Lemuria is a common example of how magic was presented, often in stories that take place in the Hyborian Age, especially in regards to Conan's story there. He made his first appearance in issue number 37 of Conan the Barbarian from the 1970s, when almost everyone who read comics or otherwise was into the sword and sorcery genre. In this same issue, Rotath was killed by Kull after he was hired by the king of Lemuria, who was frightened of Rotath's power. As he died, Rotath cursed both the king and Kull, casting a spell so that he might return. And so he did. This time in a golden body, but still he ended up being defeated here. This time not by Kull directly, but instead by, well, a giant slug after fighting against Conan and Juma. This is a true story, by the way. Man, I hate when I get defeated by giant slugs.
Ah, slugs, man, they get you. It's funny because all you need is like a little bit of table salt.
Yes.
Take that sucker off the board.
Number 7. The Skyband. The Skyband are a gang of villains who battle the pulp hero known as the Phantom in several stories throughout the character's history. The Skyband are an all-female group of sky pirates who terrorize the air. They are led by a woman named the Baroness, who has an unrequited love for the Phantom despite them being on opposite sides of the law. Another member of the gang, named Sala, is also in love with the Phantom, and frequently comes into contact and/or conflict with the hero many times throughout his storied history, and once the Baroness dies in her first appearance, Sala takes over the gang. They are a mainstay of the Phantom mythology, appearing in the original comic strips, the comic books published by Gold Key, Charlton, DC, Marvel, Moonstone, and Dynamite Comics. They also appeared in an episode of the Defenders of the Earth cartoon, which featured the Phantom fighting alongside Mandrake the Magician and Flash Gordon in space, although in this version they were of course space pirates. Their most notable appearance is probably in the 1996 movie starring Billy Zane, where Sala was played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. Number 6. Dr. Death. There are actually two Dr. Deaths. The first one was a recurring villain of a rather boring hero named Nibs Holloway, who was a troubleshooter for a jewelry company. This Dr. Death was an international criminal who of course stole jewelry. He died at the end of his first appearance, but due to reader interest was brought back for a second story. He died again, before being resurrected for one more time for a fourth and final story. The character proved more popular than the hero, in being that it was difficult to come up with scenarios where a jewelry store troubleshooter would come into conflict with an over-the-top supervillain. A new Dr. Death was created and given his own book. The new Dr. Death was a mad scientist named Dr. Rance Mandarin, who used to be the dean of psychology at Yale before he lost his mind and decided that he would use both scientific and occult methods to kill as many people as possible, believing that the world was becoming overpopulated. His enemy was a supernatural detective named Jimmy Holm, who would stop all the Doctor's plans and eventually marry his niece, Nina. Number 5. Ming the Merciless. When the Earth was bombarded by a series of meteors, Dr. Hans Zarkov built a spaceship to locate the meteor's planet of origin. He set off to space with a woman named Dale Arden and a man named Flash Gordon in tow. They traveled to the planet Mongo, which they discovered was being ruled by an evil emperor named Ming the Merciless. Ming immediately wanted to marry Dale and forced Flash to fight in his gladiatorial battle arena. He became a staple of the Flash Gordon mythos and has appeared in every subsequent version of the series, from the original 1934 comic strips to the subsequent film serials of 1936, 38, and 1940. He went up against Flash and the gang again in the 1979 and 1996 animated series, as well as the 1986 Defenders of the Earth series and a 2007 live-action series for the Sci-Fi Channel. Although he is perhaps most well known to modern audiences for his appearance in the 1980 feature film where he was played by Max von Sydow. He has a bit of a complicated legacy, as he is clearly inspired by negative Asian stereotypes like Fu Manchu, but since he's technically an alien, this issue has been avoided in certain adaptations by making him a generic white dude in the 2007 series, or a green reptilian alien in the Defenders of the Earth series. Number 4. Shiwan Khan. Alright, this is the last of the Yellow Peril style villains on this list. The Shadow's arch nemesis, Shiwan Khan, has a kinda funny backstory, as in the pulp novels he is said to be the last living descendant of Genghis Khan. Of course, due to DNA testing, we now know that Genghis Khan had so many children that 1 in 200 people alive today are descended from him. But let's go with it. Shiwan is intent on living up to his ancestors' legacy by conquering as much of the world as possible. He operated out of the lost city of Xanadu, where he was trained by Tibetan monks who taught him how to harness his telepathic powers and become invisible, clairvoyant, and how to control the dead. Shiwan Khan is far and away the most often recurring shadow villain, appearing in pulp stories The Golden Master, Shiwan Khan Returns, The Invincible Shiwan Khan, and Masters of Death. He's also appeared at some point in every subsequent comic book iteration of the Shadow, including those published by Archie Comics, DC Comics, Dark Horse Comics, and Dynamite Entertainment. He is also the main antagonist of the 1994 live-action Alec Baldwin starring Shadow movie. Number 3. John Sunlight. Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, who has an Arctic headquarters called the Fortress of Solitude and whose first name is Clark, is an obvious source of inspiration for Superman. Although he doesn't have actual superpowers and was instead trained from birth to be an expert in almost every field and to achieve peak human condition. He is an incredibly effective pulp hero, and as a result never really had many repeat villains other than John Sunlight, who managed to survive his first encounter with Doc Savage only to be killed in his second appearance. John Sunlight is the only character who can match Savage in intelligence and even overcome him in strength. As a result, the two have an immense respect for each other, even if they are enemies. He has the ability to hypnotize all but the most intelligent of men, and his goal is to end world hunger, war, and intolerance. Unfortunately, he wants to do this by becoming the ruler of the world, so this doesn't really gel with Savage's goals. In the first story, The Fortress of Solitude, he escaped from an Arctic Russian prison before he came across Doc's fortress, which was filled with Savage's most deadly inventions. He began selling these weapons to rival armies who were at war. At the end of this adventure, Savage came across remains that seemed to imply that Sunlight had been eaten by a polar bear, but it was actually Sunlight who ended the bear and went on to try and get his revenge on Savage in the story The Devil Genghis, where the hypnotized masses turned on him and tore him limb from limb. The character has appeared in the years since in several of the various Doc Savage comic books that have come out in the years since. Number 2. Dr. Satan. Weird Tales magazine is best known for publishing the stories of authors like Seabury Quinn and H.P. Lovecraft. And though they did publish a few recurring characters, they didn't really go in for the hero or villain pulps that would one day evolve into the superheroes we know today. However, they did have one hero and villain pair that they would publish 8 adventures of between 1933 and 1934. The hero was an occult detective named Ascot Keen, but it was the more colorful villain who received top billing. Dr. Satan. Dr. Satan would use occult magic in order to enact criminal schemes, such as causing plants to grow out of men's skulls and reanimating dead bodies to pose as kidnap victims in order to extort people for money. Although we never learned his true identity, we did learn that he is actually just a rich playboy who learned magic and turned to crime out of boredom. This character has fallen into the public domain, so you could make your own Dr. Satan stories and no one could stop you. Number 1. Superman. Fans of the Man of Steel may know that Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster and first appeared in Action Comics #1 in 1938, before taking the world by storm and becoming one of the most enduring and iconic pop culture icons of all time. What not everyone is aware of is that Clark Kent was not the first Superman that Siegel and Shuster created. In 1933, 5 years before Action Comics #1, the pair published a short story in issue 3 of the fanzine Science Fiction: The Advance Guard of Future Civilization, under the pseudonym of Herbert S. Fine. The character was a poor, bald man named Bill Dunn who was in a breadline before being selected by a scientist to be the subject of an experiment. The chemicals that the professor made Bill ingest granted him telepathic powers, and he killed the scientist. This Superman decides to use his powers to conquer the world, but soon discovers that the effects of the potion are temporary, and without the scientist, he will soon be a poor nobody on the breadlines once again. Siegel and Shuster would end up reusing the name when they created their more famous character, but the two would eventually introduce another bald villain for the new Superman to fight.